Have you ever noticed the glaring disconnect between how executives talk about AI in the boardroom and the absolute just sweating panic happening on the operational front lines?
Oh, it is a massive canyon. I mean, up on the executive floor, it's all, glowing dashboards and frictionless synergy, talk of unprecedented efficiency.
Right.
But down in the server room, among the people actually maintaining the infrastructure, it's pure survival mode.
Yeah, let's unpack the mechanics of that, canyon, because you are joining us for a deep dive into what has rapidly become, well, the trillion-dollar blind spot of the modern enterprise.
Absolutely.
We're exploring the AI compliance crash of 2026. So if you're prepping for a board meeting or, auditing a tech stack, or maybe you just want to understand why these massive celebrated tech deployments are suddenly turning into giant legal liabilities overnight, you're definitely in the right place.
You really are.
We're going to explore why the corporate rush to integrate AI without writing a fundamental instruction manual or, mapping the architecture has essentially created a structural crisis.
And we have some incredibly dense, unvarnished source material to guide us today. We are looking at raw operational analyses, right? Not polished public relations statements.
Which is refreshing.
Extremely. We're synthesizing strategic insights from Prasad Bond, who outlines this brilliant architectural framework called restorative engineering, and it's heavily inspired by the design philosophy of Dieter Rams.
Right. Less but better.
Exactly. And we're pairing that with a structural breakdown by Satyam Srivastava on how the year 2026 quietly changed the rules of AI. From, a futuristic guessing game to strict, heavy-handed enforcement.
So our goal today for this deep dive is to break down the mechanics of this structural failure. We're going to show you the daily realities of the frontline operators dealing with this mess.
Yeah, the real trenches.
And most importantly, we're going to walk through a clear architecture-based framework to eliminate enterprise compliance debt. We're moving past the hype and really looking under the hood.
Which is precisely where regulators are setting their focus now.
Yeah. Let's wind the clock back just slightly to understand the structural shift that triggered this. Because before 2026, compliance was essentially like an academic exercise.
It was a thought experiment.
Right. Organizations treated AI regulation as a future policy debate. You'd go to a tech conference and people would sit on panels, stroke their chins, and debate the theoretical implications of artificial general intelligence. It was a tomorrow problem.
That was always 5 years out.
Exactly. Leadership teams operated on this massive assumption throughout 2024 and 2025. They assumed regulation would arrive as gentle guidance, like best practices, a multi-year grace period to get their house in order.
And that assumption just completely collapsed. I mean, compliance arrived not as a polite tap on the shoulder, but as sudden, aggressive enforcement.
Yeah.
The EU AI Act and the Digital Personal Data Protection mandates, they didn't just ask nicely, right? They brought a sledgehammer to the enterprise operating model.
But what made 2026 the specific inflection point? What caused regulators to stop asking if a company uses AI and start aggressively demanding to know exactly how that AI is governed and mapped and audited?
Well, 3 specific operational realities basically collided. First, AI definitively moved out of the sandbox. It was no longer this cute, quarantined pilot project that a few developers in a lab were playing with.
Right, the novelty wore off.
Exactly. It became deeply embedded into core production workflows. We are talking about finance, human resources, credit approvals, customer service triage, dynamic supply chain routing.
The core machinery.
Right. It became the actual nervous system of the business.
So the stakes shifted entirely.
Yes, and that leads directly to the second point, which is that the outcomes of these AI models suddenly carried immediate real-world impacts.
Like actual consequences for real people.
Exactly. We aren't talking about a generative model drafting a polite marketing email anymore. We are talking about predictive algorithms altering dynamic pricing models on the fly during a supply shortage. We are talking about automated logic determining eligibility for a commercial mortgage, or, filtering out thousands of resumes for a critical job before a human ever even sees a single application.
So the decisions went from zero-stakes novelty to life-altering for the end consumer. And I imagine regulators don't really care about the novelty of the tech, they care about the impact on the consumer.
Spot on. That is the third convergence. Regulators shifted their posture entirely away from theoretical capabilities and focused entirely on the immediate harm being done right now by poorly governed models.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The whole line of questioning changed. A regulator no longer walks into a bank and asks, Are you using AI? They walk in and demand, explain exactly how this specific neural network arrived at this specific denial of service for this demographic.
Ouch.
And show me the data provenance log to prove you had the legal right to train the model on that specific user profile.
Think about this like introducing an invasive species into a closed ecosystem without knowing its reproductive rate or its diet.
That's a great way to put it.
Like you dump a new breed of fish into a lake because it eats algae and cleans the water, which sounds incredibly efficient,
Very
right?
synergistic.
Right. But you didn't document its behavior. You didn't map its interactions.
Mhm.
2 years later, the algae is gone, but so is every other native fish. And the local environmental agency is standing on the shore demanding to see your ecological impact study.
And you have nothing.
Exactly. The executives are standing there holding a blank piece of paper because they just bought the fish off a vendor and threw it in the water.
The invasive species analogy maps perfectly to how third-party data APIs were integrated into these enterprise systems. And the hidden cost that nobody modeled for in this scenario is the friction.
The friction, yeah.
When executives initially calculated the risk of noncompliance, they only modeled the monetary fines. They looked at the EU AI Act, saw the penalty limits of tens of millions of euros or like a percentage of global turnover, and they just provisioned for it.
Like a speeding ticket.
Exactly. They treated it as a cost of doing business.
They completely missed the operational paralysis.
They entirely missed the friction. And what does this friction look like mechanically? It looks like cross-border rules violently colliding with global distributed models.
Oh, man.
Right, because if you train a massive AI model on a global unstructured data set, but the EU implements strict data provenance rules that conflict with North American data harvesting practices, your core model is suddenly a massive legal liability in one jurisdiction while remaining core infrastructure in another.
And you can't just untangle the model. Like, you can't tell a neural network to just forget the European data.
You really cannot. And furthermore, you have enforcement timelines moving exponentially faster than internal corporate response cycles.
The regulators are moving faster than the engineers can map it.
Exactly. A regulatory body demands a comprehensive audit of an automated decision pipeline within 30 days. The corporation initiates an internal review and realizes it's going to take their engineering team 6 months just to map where the AI endpoints are actually making API calls in their legacy architecture.
That is terrifying.
The fines are painful, certainly, but the friction is what actually stops the business from functioning. It halts product roadmaps, it freezes deployments.
So when those regulators show up with a warrant and a stopwatch, what are they actually auditing? Because reading from Satyam Srivastava's structural breakdown, they aren't finding a well-oiled machine operating just slightly outside the lines.
Not at all.
They're finding an undocumented abyss. They're finding a black box.
The terrifying reality is that the primary bottleneck in the modern corporate landscape isn't a lack of computing power. It isn't, a shortage of machine learning engineers or access to capital.
Right.
It is the sheer volume of undocumented, unmapped AI models executing core enterprise decisions without any audit trails. We built these massive high-velocity decision engines, and we just completely skipped the inventory phase. We delegated our core logic to ghosts in the machine.
It's wild. Satyam Srivastava's analysis breaks this down into the 4 compliance gaps of 2026. If we want to understand why these systems are failing structurally, we have to look at the anatomy of this black box. Let's explore the first one, which is the visibility gap.
The visibility gap is arguably the most frightening dynamic for a CEO or a chief risk officer. It simply means leadership does not know where AI is making decisions inside their own organization.
They're completely blind.
Yes. It is the evolution of shadow IT. A marketing team, trying to hit quarterly targets might buy an off-the-shelf sauce tool that uses a hidden AI model to score and route inbound leads.
Sure, happens all the time.
Or the HR department, overwhelmed with applications, integrates a lightweight browser plugin that filters resumes based on semantic search.
And the central engineering team didn't build any of this.
Exactly. The chief technology officer has zero visibility into these deployments because they weren't provisioned through secure central channels. They were just plugged into the workflow by department heads trying to move faster.
Right, bypassing IT entirely.
So the enterprise is suddenly relying on nested API endpoints, where one black box vendor tool is passing data to another black box vendor tool, creating this web of automated logic that is entirely invisible to the people who bear the legal liability for the company.
That is a nightmare, which immediately triggers the second structural flaw, the ownership gap. If visibility is the problem of not knowing the system exists, ownership is the problem of knowing it exists but lacking technical accountability.
Yes.
I like to picture this as a corporate game of musical chairs, where the music stops in milliseconds, and absolutely nobody wants to be caught sitting in the seat of liability.
The musical chairs dynamic is incredibly accurate. I mean, AI outcomes have thousands of users within an enterprise, but no clearly accountable owners.
Yeah.
Take a customer service team utilizing an automated generative chatbot to handle level 1 support tickets. But when that chatbot begins hallucinating, perhaps promising a customer a massive refund it shouldn't have, or offering a pricing tier that doesn't legally exist, who is accountable?
Well, the head of customer service says, hey, we just use the tool, talk to IT, it's their software.
Right. And IT says we didn't build the underlying foundation model, talk to the third-party vendor.
The classic runaround.
And, of course, the vendor's terms of service state, they aren't liable for end-user deployment. So there is no named human being legally or technically responsible for the output. The system is operating with total autonomy, but zero ownership.
Which makes the third gap inevitable, the audit gap. If no one owns it, and no one can see the full map of it, you certainly can't reconstruct its logic.
The audit gap is basically the mechanical failure to reconstruct a decision after the fact. Traditional software is deterministic. It relies on explicit rules.
If this, then that.
Exactly. If a traditional legacy system denies a small business loan, an engineer can look at the database logs and see exactly which threshold the applicant failed to meet. The logic is linear and it's frozen in time.
But AI isn't like that.
No, AI, particularly deep learning models, operates probabilistically.
It is inferring patterns across a massive dynamic vector space.
Yes. So if that probabilistic model denies a loan and the business owner files a discrimination complaint, the bank must be able to prove exactly why the loan was denied to comply with fair lending laws.
Right, you have to show your math.
But because the AI operates dynamically, shifting millions of weights and parameters based on continuous data feeds, the bank literally cannot explain the decision. They cannot pull up a deterministic log.
Wow.
The specific mathematical state of the model that led to that specific denial is just lost to the ether the millisecond after the decision is made. The bank cannot defend its own logic.
That's terrifying. And the final piece of Shrivastava's framework is the jurisdiction gap.
Yeah.
We touched on this with the cross-border friction. AI behaviors and data flows cross international borders at the speed of light. Governance frameworks, however, are stubbornly geographical.
Extremely geographic. When a distributed AI system processes data from a German citizen using a compute cluster located in Singapore, manipulated by an engineering team working asynchronously in California, which set of regulatory laws applies to that specific data transformation?
It's a jurisdictional nightmare.
It really is. The AI moves and scales faster than geographical governance can track, leaving the enterprise exposed on multiple international fronts simultaneously.
To ground this in a tangible reality, our sources highlight a massive failure analyzed by Ashutosh Singhal. He points to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, dropping the hammer on the Apple and Goldman Sachs partnership regarding the Apple Card.
Yes, that is a masterclass in structural architecture failure.
It really is.
Singhal notes that a single broken state machine design within their automated dispute resolution architecture swallowed over 10,000 customer disputes. It is a failure that definitively proves the old Silicon Valley mantra of move fast and break things is just dead.
Yeah, you really cannot apply move fast and break things to consumer credit files. But let's look at the mechanics of that failure, because it's fascinating. A state machine, in its simplest form, governs the transitions of a process, right?
Yes.
A customer dispute can only exist in specific states, like received, under investigation, resolved, or rejected.
Right. And when you design an automated system to handle those state transitions, and you fail to rigorously map the pathways between those states, perhaps the AI encounters an unhandled edge case in a customer's uploaded receipt, and it just can't figure out how to transition the dispute from received to under investigation.
It gets stuck.
Exactly. And the system doesn't necessarily throw a massive, loud error. In a poorly designed asynchronous architecture, the dispute just drops. It vanishes into a digital void.
So the customer is essentially screaming into the void that there is a fraudulent charge on their account, and the automated system simply eats the complaint and does nothing.
And because of the audit gap and the ownership gap we just discussed, Goldman Sachs couldn't just open a simple ledger and easily trace where the logic failed. The automated routing was too opaque.
I have to challenge the premise of how we even arrived here, though. How did highly sophisticated tech giants and legacy financial institutions essentially forget basic software discipline?
It is baffling, isn't it?
I mean, these are companies that build incredibly complex, robust legacy systems. They know how to build secure databases. Why did they suddenly plug external probabilistic models into highly sensitive HR and credit workflows without even mapping the basic API calls?
Well, the truth is, they didn't forget their discipline. They fundamentally misunderstood the material they were working with.
How so?
The industry mistakenly treated generative AI and large language models like traditional software features. They treated it like adding a new search bar to a website or, updating a user interface.
They treated it as an aesthetic or functional upgrade rather than a structural change to the actual physics of their application.
Exactly. Prasad Brand argues quite forcefully that we shouldn't have treated AI like a traditional software feature. We should have treated it like an industrial control system.
That is a fascinating pivot. When you say industrial control system, you mean the architecture that runs physical infrastructure like power plants, assembly lines, water treatment facilities.
Exactly. Think about the engineering rigor required in a chemical plant. When an industrial engineer installs a new physical valve on a high-pressure volatile chemical pipe, they do not simply screw it on, turn the pressure up to maximum, and just hope the metal holds.
Yeah, that would be catastrophic.
They document its exact pressure tolerance. They log its material composition down to the molecular level. They register a strict, immutable maintenance schedule.
Right.
They know exactly which shift supervisor is responsible for that specific valve. And crucially, there is a physical, heavy, red manual override wheel right next to it in case the automated pressure sensors fail. That is what we call a component data sheet.
But enterprise AI was deployed without component data sheets.
Precisely. Companies bolted high-pressure, highly volatile, probabilistic decision engines directly onto their core business pipes. They did this without documenting the tolerance levels of the models, without logging the data provenance, and without installing a manual override.
They just wired the valve open and walked away.
They did.
And the fallout from that lack of documentation isn't just a theoretical legal vulnerability sitting in some risk officer's filing cabinet. It is creating a brutal, invisible daily toll on the human beings tasked with keeping the lights on.
Oh, the human cost is massive.
Right, we are talking about the structural architectural flaws, but the immediate crisis is happening on the front lines.
There is a stark, almost painful contrast between executive AI optimism and the daily compliance realities of the operators. It is genuinely a tale of two entirely different corporate environments.
Let's look at the executive vantage point first. Up at the C-suite, AI is viewed as this streamlined, intelligent, frictionless upgrade. It exists on slide decks as a shiny dashboard showing increased productivity metrics, reduced headcount costs, and faster time to market.
But down in the trenches, the frontline operators, the DevOps engineers, the site reliability engineers, the compliance analysts, they view this exact same technology as a massive, uncontrollable liability generator.
Because they're the ones holding the bag.
Yes. This disconnect creates what the sources define as undocumented labor.
Because there was no initial documentation when these systems were rushed into production to satisfy board mandates, someone eventually has to map the maze.
When a regulatory body like the EU AI Act demands a comprehensive audit of an automated decision pipeline, the executives just agree to provide it. But the burden falls on the engineering teams.
The people who already have full-time jobs.
Exactly. These highly skilled, highly compensated engineers are now working brutal weekend shifts to retroactively reverse engineer their own production deployments.
It is the digital equivalent of being blindfolded, forced to build a labyrinth, and then 2 years later, under the threat of a $50 million fine, being told you have 48 hours to draw a perfect cartographic map of every hallway.
That's a painfully accurate analogy. They are manually tracing tangled webs of API calls. They're sifting through fragmented logs just to prove to regulators that they actually understand what their own systems are doing.
Which is crazy.
It is a phenomenal waste of senior engineering talent. I mean, instead of building resilient new features or optimizing core products, your most brilliant system architects are doing forensic accounting on their own undocumented code.
The sources highlight a brilliant, darkly comedic reality about the lexicon used to describe this disconnect. The language itself highlights the structural absurdity.
It really does. The board of directors will proudly refer to the new system in shareholder meetings as predictive cognitive automation. They wrap it in the language of inevitable progress.
Right. It sounds very fancy.
But the exhausted night shift compliance officer, The site reliability engineer who is actually watching the system throw unhandled exceptions at 3 a.m., they don't call it predictive cognitive automation.
No, I imagine they have other words for it.
They call it the random number generator that voided our commercial insurance policy, or, the thing that blinks until someone taps the server.
That captures the grim operational humor perfectly. High-level R&D ambition colliding with mundane operational failure. And we shouldn't just laugh at the lexicon, right? We need to visualize the actual aesthetic of this reality.
Yes, the aesthetic is important.
Because the media trains us to think of AI in a very specific visual language. We expect glowing neural nodes, floating holograms, slick, futuristic user interfaces. We expect it to look like a sci-fi movie command center.
But the reality of AI compliance work is brutally, aggressively mundane.
Totally.
It is material honesty. It is an exhausted operator sitting at a heavy desk, bathed in the harsh light of overhead fluorescent bulbs. They are not interacting with a voice-activated holographic assistant, I can promise you that.
No, definitely not.
They are staring at a matte black monitor, watching a rigid scrolling list of failed compliance checks in plain, stark, white terminal text. There is no synergy. There is no magic. It is just raw, physical reality, technical debt, and profound operational fatigue.
It's attempting to mop the floor of a server room while the water pipe above you is still actively rupturing. And if the current architecture is burning out operators, demoralizing top-tier engineering talent, and leaking massive amounts of capital through operational friction and regulatory fines, the solution is obvious.
Right.
Buying another vendor's AI software to monitor the broken AI software clearly isn't the answer. You cannot solve unchecked complexity by stacking more complexity on top of it.
No, you have to reduce. As the sources point out, the solution is a brutal, systematic reduction and a return to fundamental physical engineering principles.
And this brings us to the architectural core of our deep dive. Prasad Bond's framework of restorative engineering and how he applies the design philosophy of DPDPs to artificial intelligence. Bond argues that technology must, above all else, remain subject to human agency.
Which is a very powerful stance. For those who might not be intimately familiar, Dieter Rams is a legendary industrial designer. He's most famous for his decades of work at Braun.
His work is iconic.
It really is. And his core philosophy, which has influenced everything from consumer electronics to software design, is summarized in 3 words: less, but better.
His principles dictate that good design is honest. It does not make a product appear more innovative, powerful, or valuable than it really is. Good design makes a product understandable. It strips away the non-essential.
So what does material honesty and functional clarity actually look like when applied to the chaotic world of enterprise artificial intelligence?
What does it look like?
It means a fundamental structural reset. It requires accepting a hard truth, which is that compliance is no longer a constraint on innovation. It is no longer a legal afterthought tacked onto the end of a deployment cycle.
Compliance is the primary design requirement.
Yes. If you cannot govern the model, you do not deploy the model, period.
Period.
If an AI system cannot produce a clear, definitive, verifiable audit trail for every single autonomous decision it makes, it belongs in a research sandbox. It does not belong in a production environment interacting with real human data.
Because unauditable code is a liability.
Unauditable code is not a strategic asset. It is an active, ticking threat to the enterprise. In this environment, complexity is a massive liability. Order and clarity are your only defense mechanisms.
Let's get into the mechanics of building that order. The sources lay out the specific architectural constraints of restorative engineering. If an enterprise wants to eliminate this compliance debt, they have to implement these structural steps. And the first one is information fasting.
Information fasting is a rigorous, painful process of severing connections. It means ruthlessly disconnecting any external data feeds or APIs that lack clear, documented provenance.
Because during the initial AI gold rush, companies operated on the assumption that more data inherently equaled better intelligence, right?
Always.
They were plugging their models into every API they could get their hands on. Social media sentiment scrapers, obscure alt data market feeds, unstructured public data sets. They wanted the model to have maximum context.
But under strict regulatory enforcement, context without provenance is toxic.
Toxic.
If a regulator asks you to prove where a specific piece of training data came from, and you cannot legally verify its origin or, prove that you had explicit consent to use it for that specific automated decision, your entire model becomes compromised.
So you starve the model of the toxic data. You just cut the feeds.
You implement information fasting. You rely strictly on raw, internally verified data, transparent API changelogs, and documented component data sheets. You strip away the corporate fluff, the experimental feeds, and the undocumented third-party inputs.
Which I'm sure causes friction internally.
Oh, the friction of doing this is immense.
Yeah.
Data scientists will fight tooth and nail to keep their parameters, but the architectural safety it provides is simply non-negotiable.
The second structural step is parameter engineering. If information fasting controls what goes into the model, parameter engineering controls what the model is allowed to do with it.
Yes. It is about forcing strict mechanical boundary conditions on the AI's outputs. You do not allow the AI to operate in an open-ended, fully autonomous state. You force it to operate within rigid execution metrics.
What does a boundary condition look like mechanically in a modern tech stack? Like practically speaking.
Consider an AI system designed to route high-volume customer service emails. A strict boundary condition might be a rigid latency target.
Okay.
The architecture dictates that the AI has exactly 1.5 seconds to read, categorize, and route the email. If the model encounters an edge case and it takes, say, 1.6 seconds to think or process the complexity, the system structurally aborts the AI process and instantly defaults the ticket to a human queue.
Wow, so it doesn't get to endlessly compute.
Never. Another example is a strict tolerance band for confidence scores. If an automated AI pipeline is screening a commercial loan application and its internal mathematical confidence in a rejection decision drops below 98.5%, it is structurally forbidden from issuing that rejection.
It just fails.
The API call fails by design. It must escalate the decision to a human underwriter.
You're fencing the probabilistic monster in with deterministic rules.
You are replacing blind trust with mechanical constraints. And that leads directly to the third and arguably most critical step of restorative engineering, which is operational agency.
The manual override. The red wheel on the chemical pipe.
The absolute non-negotiable necessity of a human operator possessing a physical or digital kill switch. The core philosophy here is that deployments must serve the human operator.
Not the other way around.
Right. The operator must never be relegated to serving the deployment. If an automated system begins violating compliance thresholds, hallucinating data, or behaving erratically, the human legally responsible for that system must have the agency to sever the connection immediately.
They need a satisfying, heavy mechanical clack that instantly falls the system back to a legacy process.
Yes, a gracefully degraded state. They cannot be forced to submit a high-priority IT ticket and wait 3 hours for a DevOps engineer to pull the server offline while the AI continues to execute flawed logic.
Right. But I have to put on my C-suite persona here and challenge this framework. Because I'm looking at information fasting, strict parameter boundaries, latency aborts, manual kill switches. This sounds incredibly safe. It sounds wonderfully compliant. But won't every single executive argue that this completely destroys their competitive speed to market? I mean, if my primary competitor is embracing open-ended AI, moving incredibly fast and deploying features weekly, while my team is busy fasting, installing boundary fences, and building manual fallbacks, don't I lose the market share war?
That is the precise argument that led directly to the 2026 crash. And the contrarian insight that Satyam Srivastava highlights is fundamental to understanding modern enterprise technology. Organizations that actually win over the long term are not moving slower. They are moving with fewer reversals.
Velocity without reversals. Break that down for me.
Speed to market is a dangerous illusion if it is immediately followed by a sudden, catastrophic halt.
Let's look at the hypothetical scenario, right? Your competitor deploys an unauditable black box dynamic pricing algorithm in 1 month. You take 3 months to build an auditable, constraint-bound pricing model using restorative engineering principles.
Okay.
For 2 months, they look incredibly fast. The board praises them.
But then the music stops.
In month 4, a regulatory body knocks on their door, triggered by a massive spike in consumer complaints about predatory pricing. The competitor cannot produce an audit log. They cannot explain the dynamic weights of the model.
Because they didn't map it.
Right. They are forced to pull their entire system offline immediately. They pay a $50 million fine. They spend the next 6 months manually reverse engineering their code base while managing a catastrophic public relations crisis and bleeding engineering morale.
Meanwhile, your system, which took slightly longer to build, remains online. When the regulator audits you, you hand them the component datasheet, the parameter logic, and the data provenance logs. Exactly. So who is actually moving faster?
You are.
Right. Good engineering is auditable engineering. Compliance failure is not a slow, manageable leak. It is sudden, it is devastatingly public, and it is incredibly hard to reverse.
Yeah.
Therefore, in the modern operational landscape, compliance is a signal of trust, not a tax on speed. It is the bedrock foundation that allows you to scale safely. Organizations that embrace restorative engineering aren't avoiding innovation. They're designing systems that can maintain high velocity because they are structurally defensible.
That requires a massive psychological shift for leadership.
Huh.
But it leaves us with an immediate practical problem.
Always.
How do you know where your architecture stands right now? If you're a CTO, a risk officer, or a lead engineer listening to this, and you suspect your enterprise has built a fragile black box instead of a resilient system, how do you prove it? How do you map the rot before the regulator does?
You test the physical reality of the system, you stop looking at slide decks, and you stress test the architecture.
And this is the operational climax of the deep dive. The sources detail the implementation of what they call the fractured prototype discipline. It is a 48-hour validation protocol. It is a mandate to expose hidden enterprise AI bottlenecks using brutal architectural logic.
It consists of 3 specific, highly revealing, low-friction tests, and the protocol measures operational reality, completely ignoring theoretical strategy.
Let's walk through the mechanics of the 48-hour protocol. Test number 1 is the blind kill test. This is designed to directly address the visibility gap and the undocumented endpoints we explored earlier.
The mechanics are straightforward, but the implications are terrifying. You task your operations team with identifying the least documented, most opaque AI API call currently running in your infrastructure.
The one nobody understands.
Exactly. The integration you are least sure about. And you disable it. You kill the endpoint for exactly 2 hours during a standard operational window.
And then you simply observe the cascading failure. You watch the fallback.
What breaks? If the system elegantly routes around the dead endpoint or defaults to a safe state, you have some resilience.
Oh.
But if an entire department grinds to a halt, or if an internal HR portal suddenly stops routing support tickets because a rogue microservice was secretly using that undocumented AI endpoint for sentiment analysis to prioritize queues, you have just discovered a critical structural flaw.
You have an undocumented dependency that is load-bearing. The sheer brutality of the blind kill test is amazing. I can vividly imagine the terror of an IT department being told they have to intentionally unplug part of their own production software simply because they don't know what it does.
It's a wake-up call.
But it highlights the core absurdity of the black box. If you are too afraid to unplug your own system for 2 hours, you do not own that system. The system owns you.
It forces material honesty into the architecture. It reveals the ghosts.
Test number 2 in the protocol is the desk check. This is designed to expose the ownership gap.
The setup here is brilliantly analog. You send a standard email to the operations and IT management teams. You ask for the direct physical phone number or the desk location of the specific human being who is legally and technically responsible for a critical automated model.
For example.
Like the AI model that handles initial candidate screening for the engineering department.
So you aren't asking for a department flowchart. You want a name and a number. And what are you measuring here?
You measure the response latency. How long does it take for the organization to provide the name of the accountable human? Does the email bounce around between the legal department, IT security, and HR for 3 days?
Do they just point fingers?
Right. Do you receive a generic department inbox address instead of a specific person?
Because if it takes 72 hours of internal frantic emails to figure out who owns the candidate screening algorithm,
then nobody owns it. And if nobody owns it, it is a massive compliance violation waiting to detonate. The desk check proves whether accountability exists in physical reality or only in abstract policy documents.
it is so simple, but mathematically damning. And finally, test number 3, the paper protocol. This targets the missing manual fallback. It tests operational agency.
For this test, you force a core operational team, let's use the commercial credit approval team as the example, to process 5 standard applications using strictly legacy non-AI rule sets.
You force them to use deterministic databases, spreadsheets, manual underwriting logic.
Yes, and you meticulously track the time delta. You measure exactly how long it takes to execute the core business process without the machine's assistance.
And the goal isn't to prove the old way is better, right?
Not at all. The goal is absolutely not to prove that the old way is faster or better. The goal is to prove that a mechanical alternative actually exists and is functional.
You are testing the parachute.
Precisely. If the AI begins hallucinating, or a regulator walks in and demands a model be taken offline for a 30-day audit, Can the business physically continue to function, even at a severely reduced capacity?
And if they can't?
If the credit team literally cannot process a single application without the AI model functioning, you have zero operational resilience. You have built a single point of catastrophic failure.
These three tests, the blind kill, the desk check, and the paper protocol, are incredible because they are so low friction to initiate, but the results are impossible to argue with.
You can't hide from them.
Right. You cannot debate the results of a blind kill test in a boardroom. It isn't a matter of opinion. The system either crashed when you pulled the plug or it didn't.
And that is the true essence of restorative engineering. It forces a complete shift from theoretical, sanitized corporate strategy to raw physical reality. It strips away the jargon and the fluff.
It really does.
And by doing so, it begins to restore safety, clarity, and dignity to the modern operational workflow. It ensures that these incredibly powerful deployments actually serve the human operator rather than the operator constantly scrambling to serve the deployment.
And as Prasad Bond insists, drawing on DPDPs, technology must restore human capability and agency. It should elevate our structural integrity. It shouldn't turn highly skilled engineers into stressed out, exhausted babysitters for black box algorithms.
The 48-hour validation protocol isn't just about finding flaws and pointing fingers. It is a vital diagnostic tool to begin rebuilding structural trust.
How so?
Because once you know exactly where the undocumented nodes are located, once you expose the ownership gaps, and once you realize your manual fallbacks are broken, you can start applying the principles of restorative engineering.
You could finally start fixing it.
You can start building the comprehensive inventory. You can legally demand data provenance logs from your third-party vendors. You can install the mechanical kill switches.
You can finally write the instruction manual that should have been written 3 years ago?
Precisely. You build a system that can withstand the light of audit.
We have covered massive architectural ground today. We analyzed how the enforcement realities of 2026 prove that move fast and break things is fundamentally toxic when applied to highly regulated, automated workflows.
Very toxic.
The old assumption that compliance was a theoretical future problem collapsed, leaving enterprises holding a bag of undocumented, unmapped AI models.
We dissected the anatomy of that black box, the visibility gaps, ownership voids, audit impossibilities, and jurisdiction collisions that make these systems impossible to mathematically defend.
Yeah.
We saw how this creates an unbearable frontline reality of undocumented labor, where senior operators are manually reverse engineering code, while executives look at optimistic, disconnected dashboards.
And we laid out the structural fix. Prasad Bond's restorative engineering, treating enterprise AI like a volatile industrial control system, implementing information fasting to cut toxic data, parameter engineering to build boundary conditions, and restoring operational agency with manual kill switches.
It's a completely new paradigm.
Finally, we provided the 48-hour protocol to force material honesty into your architecture.
The core takeaway is that compliance must be viewed as the primary design requirement. Unauditable code is a structural liability, and organizations must map their architecture before external regulators use a sledgehammer to do it for them.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the realities of enterprise AI, I want to leave you with one final scenario to consider. Picture the physical reality of your own operation.
Okay.
Imagine a regulator walks into your office tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. They sit across your desk, open a briefcase, and demand to see the instruction manual, the verified data provenance logs, and the physical human override protocol for the AI model, making your company's most critical hiring, routing, or pricing decisions.
Yeah.
Could you hand those documents to them with total operational confidence? Or would you have to quietly admit that the machine has been driving itself in the dark?